Hi, I'm Jens. I'm the product owner of Designer here at Vaadin. Vaadin is a visual tool for editing UIs in Vaadin and meant for Java developers to be able to more productively build UIs. I regularly send out questions to our evaluators and users asking how it's going, just to gather feedback. And now I got an interesting question from one of our users that I thought that I could create a video about and share with you. So the question went like this. Everything goes fine, but what I would need is to create a large table without scrolling, to be displayed in its entirety and scrolled in the browser. Is it possible? So yes, Grid uses normally virtual scrolling, so it loads up more items when you scroll in it. But it's also possible to make the Grid use the show all items at once and scroll the page instead of the Grid. It has its good sides and bad sides to do it. Why you would prefer usually virtual scrolling is that the Grid doesn't load all the items into the browser's memory at once, or from backend either. So it loads only the rows that you see on the screen, and when the user scrolls further, it loads more of them. This means that it's a shorter time to fetch items from the backend, and it is a shorter time to render all those rows in the UI. And if you have a lot of columns, a lot of rows, it can be a impact on the performance. But I thought I would show still how to set up a Grid in Designer and show the two different modes that you can have for scrolling in there. So let's jump into the IDE. Here I already have a project set up, and for the base for it I used the Vaadin tutorial, Build Modern Web Apps with Spring Boot and Vaadin. This is a great tutorial to get started with Vaadin because it teaches you how to set up the Java development environment. It creates a new project and learns you the basic of Vaadin components, as well as helps you create a backend with a database and service repositories that we're going to use in this project. When you create Designer views, you usually want to put them into the front-end folder in your project. So let's right-click on the views folder here and choose New, Vaadin 10 Design. Let's call this Grid Sizes. I will also check this Create Java Companion File checkbox so that we can bind data to our view from Java code. Press OK, add to Git, and then Designer opens up. For this view, I think a vertical layout is a good starting layout for our application, so let's click that. And then we want to add the Grid view here. Let's search for Grid and drag it to the design. Also, just not to have only one visible component in the view, it might be good to add a header as well. So let's drag a H1 there as well. There we go. Now we have our layout, header and Grid. This is a little bit tight design now, so we can start by choosing vertical layout and add a little bit padding to the layout. And get a little bit space around the components. And the main layout should have width 100% and height 100%. And we should put the same for the Grid as well. This means that the Grid will take as much space as possible from the view, and we have this full screen view, which virtual scrolling will then take care of, showing more items. Last thing we want to do is to connect the Vaadin Grid to Java code. So, for example, let's start with opening up the companion file that it created, Grid Sizes. this doesn't have any fields or anything that we can reference right now, but we want to have a reference to the grid. So let's start by giving a name to the grid. Let's call it just grid. And then we connect it to Java by hovering over the grid in the outline and clicking on the connect button here. That exported the grid here with the name that we specified, so that we can give data to it. The back end of the application has right now it has entities for company and contact, so we can, for example, use contact as an entity that we want to show in the grid. So let's say to the grid that it will show contacts like this. Then we want to add a few columns and the data. So this might be a good point to discuss what you should usually add in the template file and what you should do in the Java file. My rule is that in the template you put everything that is static and doesn't change during runtime, and into Java you put everything that is dynamic. So for example, the heading here is something that we are not going to change, so we can have it in the template. But for example, the grid will have all the items given from the backend, and that changes based on what is in the backend. So that we will give in Java. And I see that the items that you give in and the columns that you define for it are heavily connected. So I always define the columns in Java code as well. So let's add the columns here then. So we take the reference to grid and say add column, and as it's contacts that we want to configure, let's reference those. I think we can add for example, the first name, the last name, and the email. So let's add column first name and then set header first name, and we do it twice more for last name and email, and configure the headers to match like that. Then with Spring we can inject a service that we have available here, the contact service, where we can get all the rows that we need. So let's add to the constructor contact service. And then finally for grid, we set the items and ask them from the service find all. And I think we're done. Let's build a project, start the server, here we go, and finally we open up a new browser. Oh, but I actually forgot one thing. We have a new view, but we haven't defined a route for it, how to access this view in any place. So let's add one more annotation to the view, calling route, and let's call it grid, for example. This is now the path that you can get into the view with. Click the build project so that we get that. And now we add the same grid that we added up here and load the application. Here we go. We have the header, we have the grid, it has the columns that we defined, and it has all the rows. And you can scroll the grid itself. The page doesn't scroll, you have no scroll bar here, but the grid has a scroll bar. So this uses now the virtual loading, and if you have a lot of items, it would not have rendered them all here. Now we have only like 1.5 page, so it will load everything. But if you go, for example, over 3 pages or so, it will not render anymore. And then when the scroll bar reaches close enough to the empty space, it will ask the server for more items. Next up, we will edit the view to make it look so that the page scrolls itself and the grid renders all rows at once. For that, we have to change our main layout as well as the grid. For the main layout, we want to say that it's as big as it's needed. So we're gonna remove the height 100% and put it to undefined. So it takes all the space that it needs, not limiting itself to the bottom edge of the browser. Then for the grid itself, we're gonna do the same, remove the height. And then we have a property here called height by rows. This makes exactly it so that it will render all rows at once. You can also access this same property through Java with set height by rows true. Let's click on that, and now that we don't have any rows, it will be 0 pixel high, but when we add rows, it will grow with them. We could next up look how this is in the browser as well. So let's build a project. And then refresh it from here. There we go. And now the grid doesn't anymore have a scroll bar, but the page itself has one, and it scrolls to the bottom of it. So we have already done it. What you can notice here is as well that there is an extra scroll bar here, so it's not working completely. The reason for this is that per default the Vaadin applications are configured to be views that take the whole page space. So if we go look into inspector and click on the body element, we will note that they have height 100, vertical full height in height and width, and that creates errors when you actually have a scroll bar here, which this scroll in itself makes the page a little bit thinner, and that creates the other scroll bar. So what you would have to do for this is that you configure height to be auto and width to be auto, and it's configured correctly then, like here. How you would not change this in the inspector, but actually change it in code is this next thing that we can do, and set it back so that it's the defaults. Close the inspector. We have the in front end styles folder, we have the shared styles file, and we can here say that the body should have width auto and height auto, like this. Maybe to visualize it a little bit better, we can add a background color as well. I could use, for example, Vaadin's predefined color. So let's say that we use a variable called no, I actually have to check what the Luma variable are. Vaadin Luma theme variables, and go to colors, and we take from here, for example, this blue with 50% might be a good background, or maybe 10% even. Let's take that variable from here and add it here, and we'll save. Also, normally you have a main layout in your application, and that one imports these shared styles. Now we made with the root annotation, we made a direct entry point to this view without having any parent layout. So that means that we also have to say to this now that you should use this CSS file that we have. So for that it references the front end directly, and that's where the styles file is from there. So it's in the styles folder, and within the shared styles CSS. Let's build and go to the application. Now the extra scroll bar is gone. We have a nice blue color here to visualize it, and you can scroll all the rows. And if this would have 50 times more rows, they would all be loaded at once, and the whole page would be scrollable. But then again, I would like to repeat that there is the problem with that it has to render a lot of stuff in the browser, and you have to load a lot of stuff to the memory in the backend as well. So generally, I would recommend going the first way, that you have virtual scrolling in the grid, and it's the grid that scrolls, not the page itself. But if you need to have it this way, this would be how you do it. Thank you for watching, and this was how you add a grid with Designer. And if you have any comments on what will happen here, or something else that you would like to see, add a comment down, and I'll answer you there, or make an additional video on that part. Thanks and bye.